Okay, and then we'll get started. So, folks, good evening. My name is Rodney Obian. I'm head of special collections at Mason Library at Keene State College, and I'm also an associate professor who teaches in our master's program in history and archives. Just wanted to give you a quick welcome and say hello before I turn over things to Francis and Gwen. I'm looking very much forward to this program. I'm a big fan of John and Abigail Adams, and I know Gwen is a big fan of John Quincy Adams, who she likes to call JQA. Okay, so but before we get to our program, I should say that this program is being sponsored by Keene State College's Mason Library, the History Department, and the MA program in History and Archives, and the student chapter of Phi Alpha Theta, our History Honor Society. Special thanks to Dr. Celia Rabinowitz, Dean of Mason Library, and Misty Kennedy from our Ceremonies and Events Office. Thank you, Celia. Thank you, Misty. Also want to thank New Hampshire State Archivist Brian Burford and Tim Hastings for leading the March 12th workshop on transcribing historical documents. Big thank you, Brian and Tim. And Tim, good luck as you pursue your PhD in history at UMass Amherst. A lot of you know that Tim is one of our first graduates from our MA program in history and archives. This program is being recorded, and recording will be made available on Mason Library's Facebook and on the college's YouTube channel, as well as the video recording for the March 12th workshop. Okay, I'm gonna stop talking. So without further ado, I'm gonna turn it over to Francis Beebe. And so again, welcome and enjoy this program.
Hi, everyone. I'm Francis. I'm a graduate student here at Keene in the History and Archives program. The papers of President John Adams and those of his family are considered to be one of the most important collections owned by Massachusetts Historical Society. We have special guest Gwen Fries here with us tonight from MHS to give us an overview of the project. Gwen is the production editor of the Adams Papers Editorial Project, a little mouthful. Gwen holds degrees in history and corporate communications from Elizabethtown College. She's been with the Adams Collection since 2016. The Adams Editorial Project was founded in 1954 to prepare a comprehensive published edition of the manuscripts written and received by the family of John Adams. Currently, MHS has published over 50 volumes with Harvard University Press, and they've been able to make it all available to the public online as part of the Adams Papers digital edition. So before I hand this over to Gwen, I'd ask that all the people on Zoom can write questions in either the Q&A box or the chat. Okay. To you.
Thank you. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen, and you're all going to be nice to me if it goes poorly.
We'll be nice to you, promise.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. As Francis said, my name is Gwen Fries. I've been with the Adams Papers. This is my 6th year now, and every day is just phenomenal. And by the time I breeze through this PowerPoint, you're going to see why. So the Adams family papers were deposited at the Massachusetts Historical Society by the Adams family of Massachusetts, the descendants of John and Abigail Adams. When they came to the MHS, they arrived in big trunks. They were staying in, a farmhouse in Quincy, Massachusetts, not temperature controlled, not anything. We had relatives coming out of the woodwork who had documents wrapped in like brown paper with twine. So the original editors kind of got a little bit of like a Christmas morning experience of like ripping open brown paper and seeing like the definitive Anglo-American peace treaty, stuff like that, something that actually happened. So it was deposited in 1954, and it took the original editor-in-chief, Lyman Butterfield, about 2 years to get his ducks in a row, figure out the editorial practices he wanted to implement. And so the first volume was published in 1956. So the family entrusted us with these papers, number one, because the MHS had people there who could take care of them and make them last for future generations. But also they wanted the papers to be shared because John and Abigail and their children and grandchildren knew how significant their legacy was going to be to the history of the country. So they recorded everything very purposefully. You know, like it hit John sometime around the Revolution, and he was talking to Abigail and the children. He's saying, like, don't throw anything out, keep track of everything. Like, he kind of knew he was building an archive in the moment, which is pretty extraordinary. So the family gave us the papers with the mandate that we were to prepare a comprehensive published edition of the manuscripts written and received by the Adams family of Massachusetts. So this is a picture of what we call the cage, which is where it is actually literally a cage, and it is where we save all of the documents. So this is one of several aisles that look like this. Every one of those boxes is the Adams papers. You can see our cart down at the end. Those are all Adams papers, and the big blue boxes are letterbox. So anyway, so here are all the boxes, and here's the aisle. This will make much more sense now. So we do have several aisles of these. We have over 1,000 boxes of manuscripts, and we have letter books, we have the diaries. So altogether, we have more than 250,000 manuscript pages. It's actually closer to 300,000, but that wasn't enough for us. We wanted to be more comprehensive. So since the 50s, we have reached out to institutions in the United States, all around the world, South America, Russia, as well as private individuals. And so we have tried to amass a comprehensive collection. And so the Adams family papers, the original core collection that the family gave us, covers from 1639 to 1889. So the earliest stuff is kind of like deeds and things like that. But our project wants to focus on John Adams and his descendants. So we start in 1753, which is John's earliest diary. So let me do some math. He's 18 when he starts. And we go all the way until 1889, which is the death of Abigail Brooks Adams, who is the wife of diplomat Charles Francis Adams, who is the son of John Quincy Adams. So, all right. So did the screen change?
It did, yeah.
Okay, excellent. All right. So our project mainly focuses on 3 generations of the Adams family, but you could really say that it focuses on like our 3 main power couples of the Adams family. And of course, it starts with John and Abigail Adams. There they are there. And then their son, John Quincy Adams, and his wife, Louisa Catherine Adams. And then John Quincy's son, Charles Francis Adams, and his wife, Abigail Brooks Adams. So I think something cool that just that quickly showed you that we went from like these really early pastels, and now we have photorealism. And this photo was taken by Charles Francis's son, Henry. His wife, Clover, was an early American photographer. So she took this picture of them, but I will include the next slide because I always feel bad that everyone got these like glamorized young portraits, and then you see them like very elderly and like photorealism. So I just like to remind people that they were once young and beautiful as well. So anyway, so our goal every single day is to take what is on the left, this document on the left, and turn it into what's on the right. So any of you who have done research could very easily see that the left is really cool, the original manuscript. It's very interesting to see, but if you were looking for some kind of specific fact, where you were trying to look at like trends over 10 years or something, reading this all day is going to be really difficult. And how nice would it be if you could do a keyword search? So that's why we do what we do. And we also, you can read their handwriting, but we want to give you a definitive, this is the transcription, because we're so familiar with the hands because we're doing it 7 to 8 hours a day, every day. And then of course, we want to provide annotation that you can see on the bottom to provide some historical context. Maybe like they mention something that's happening in Prussia and you're not really up on your Prussian history, or they mention a servant or like Miss Smith and you're like, well, which Miss Smith? We'll tell you that in the annotation. So our editorial process is made up of the 7 shuns. selection is when the editor of the series will look through all of those boxes that I was showing you in that picture and decide what's the most relevant, what's the most interesting. We prioritize documents by women because our collection is really unique in how many women's voices are represented. Really, any underrepresented group is somebody we would want to highlight. So they will go through and select about like 300 documents per volume, and then we will transcribe them, which is what you can see here in this picture. So somebody will go through, it might be an intern, it might be me, somebody will go through and provide a really rough transcription. They're just trying to get speed. They're trying to do 300 documents so we can get going. And then what we would do next is collation, which is an oral tandem proofreading. So this specific scan is an example of collation. So like we would read this kind of spelling things out and calling out punctuation. So like it would be, I cannot, one word, omit so good an opportunity as the present by my capson of paying my respects to you, comma, and of acknowledging the honor, OR, done him by the unsolicited appointment conferred, CONFERD. So something like that. So we will do that for 3 to 4 months. So while you're enjoying your summers, think of me because I'm going to be spelling like that. So then once the whole volume is collated, then we consider that this is the definitive reading of these documents. And then we go through to annotating it, like I said, providing historical context. And other editors come behind us and verify it so that what you are seeing has been, I would say about 5 of us have said, yes, this is true before you read anything in any of our volumes, because we want to make sure. And then it goes into production. So production is when I take over. And so we actually do our production in-house, which is also pretty unique. But we take it from looking like just a Microsoft Word document to looking like a book. So we adjust line spacing, we make sure hyphens, like at the line breaks are correct, stuff like that. It's really tedious and I love it. And then once we do all of that, then we go to publication and we send it off to Harvard and they will publish it. We will get these gorgeous books in a couple of weeks. And that's actually what we're going to be doing next week on our 57th volume, which is very exciting. So there are a couple of resources that if you are a researcher, just a history lover, somebody interested in the Adamses or the early American Republic, you might want to use. So I have sent these links to Frances. She's going to share them in the chat, and then I think they're going to go out in an email later with the recording. So you will have time. So the first resource is the Adams Papers digital edition, which is a really neat thing. This is where you can do your keyword search. You can search by name, topic, anything. This is really the main resource if you want to do research with the Adams Papers. So this is just an example. You can see the volumes there and what they cover. The second resource is the John Quincy Adams Digital Diary. As was mentioned, JQA is my favorite Adams. In my defense, he calls himself JQA. I didn't come up with a pet name. When he was like 7 years old, he decided he was JQA. And he stuck with that his whole life. So the digital diary is a relatively new project, but it is extremely exciting because we, as you can see the original document on the right, the original image, as well as a verified transcription. And you can also keyword search this. And the really cool thing about the digital diary is that JQA kept a diary for 68 years. And he almost never missed a day. When he had a stroke, he dictated it. Like, this is a phenomenal resource. No matter what you're researching, if it falls in between, like the American Revolution through till 1848, this is your resource. Even if you're researching Charles Dickens, he's in here. I mean, absolutely everything is in here. And then the third resource would be Oak, which is our online Adams catalog. And this is a good place to start if you might be researching like the Adams's relationship with someone, or if you're like working on an individual and you want to know, did they ever interact with the Adamses this would be a good place to look. You would just search Rudyard Kipling, and then his letters would come up. He was a friend of John Adams's grandson. So which I didn't know, and I just opened a folder and I was looking at Rudyard Kipling letter, which is like really cool. So you can search it by year. You can see, did these people have a tip? Did they write every day? Like, you can really get a feel for the collection through this. It really makes the collection much more manageable for researchers. And as you can see here, it gives microfilm information. If you're a fan of microfilm, it tells you where the document is held. So like I said, most of them are held by the Massachusetts Historical Society, but we do have things held by private owners, or like we'll tell you what's in the Library of Congress, because we just want this to be as comprehensive as possible with the Adamses. And then if it's viewable online, whether it's in the digital edition, or if it was just scanned to be on the MHS website, like we have all of John and Abigail's correspondence in a digital collection on the website. So that's all there. And then finally, our last resource is all of us. And if you have any questions or want to know about how to get started researching, you can just email us right there. And that is also available on our website. So I will stop sharing now and let's chat about it.
Thank you so much, Gwen. That was amazing and really interesting. I'm wondering if, I guess you could share for our history and archives graduate students and prospective graduate students and anyone who's interested, I guess, but if you could walk us through, a typical day for you at the Adams Collection, and just give us a sense of what it's like to interact with the treasure trove, Adams papers.
Sure. Well, we always do start the day with coffee, nowhere near the documents. It's a hard and fast rule. Before the documents, I'm the person who runs up to the cage every morning to bring the cart down. For the documents we're working on, obviously, we wash our hands first, but we don't wear gloves, which is the best practice. And then we each one of us is using a different document because we have two series that run. We have the Adams Family Correspondence and we have the Papers of John Adams. So somebody might be working on Adams Family Correspondence, so they're using a box from 1810, and somebody might be working on Papers of John Adams, and we are just getting into the presidents. So it also creates some really interesting conversations where somebody will be like, guess what Alexander Hamilton did? You're like, isn't he dead? And it's like, spoilers, like that's the really corny joke because people always go spoilers. But yeah, so we work, we each have our own office and we work on the documents. And then we have a morning meeting where we talk about what we're working on and we collaborate. And, if somebody is transcribing or collating and they're stuck on a word, or there's an ink blot, or maybe the paper's not in the best condition, then we all confer on that. We all hunch over the desk and look at it. But yeah, it's there's a lot of individual work, but we also collaborate all the time. So it's really the best of both worlds in that sense. And then sad time of day when the documents have to go back up into the cage until tomorrow. But yeah, and we also, we work on interacting with the public, whether it be through social media or if a researcher's actually in this room I have behind me has a question, we'll run down to help them, or answering reference questions. So, yeah.
And you, I guess we spoke about this with Rodney earlier, but on your website, there's a kind of mysterious red link that that is says something like "Ask the Adams Scholar." Is that what it says? And I was asking Gwen, who are the Adams Scholars? And maybe you can answer that for us.
It's me. that will go into my inbox.
Yeah, what kind of questions do you get, and are there things that stump you? And
we largely get questions from amateur genealogists, which is really interesting. You get people from all over the country and the world who think they're descendants of the Adamses to help them find out if they are, and if so, how, like through which line, because John Adams had 4 kids. So yeah, that's always really exciting for people when like we can say, yes, you are.
You're related.
Yeah, we also have like elementary school students, middle school students who are, you know, writing their first paper, or like maybe just finding out about who Abigail Adams was, and their mom helps them type an email asking us like, could you tell me more about Abigail Adams? And I think so on the same day, you could be answering somebody who's 8 years old and somebody who's 80 years old and has been working on a book like their whole adult life after work about John Quincy Adams. And we just get really cool reference questions from all over the world. Like I just had a gentleman from Ghent who's really interested in John Quincy Adams and his time in Ghent. And so he's been using the John Quincy Adams digital diary to actually start writing a book about John Quincy Adams' time in Ghent. So it's something a little bit different all the time. It's really funny how different Adamses go in vogue certain years. Like John Quincy Adams is really in vogue right now. I can't remember the last time I had a reference question about anybody but him. But it's really fun because you have no idea what's going to come up in a reference question. Like we're working chronologically through the books, and then you get a reference question. It could be absolutely anything in the world. It keeps you on your toes. It's really fun.
That gets you to engage a little more deeply with the material, I think, right?
Definitely.
Well, you've got some people who have questions for you. From Celia Rabinowitz. I'm interested in hearing about Gwen's preparation for this work, including academic training, other jobs, and other experiences that led her to this work.
That's a good question. Well, so I went to Elizabethtown College and I majored in history and corporate communications, which was a really good combo because a lot of what we do is interacting with the public, like I said, but also writing grants, fundraising, hosting events, stuff like that. So like I took an event planning course, which has really come in handy. Actually, the thing in my interview that they kept asking about was I was the editor-in-chief of my college newspaper. And like just editorial work was something that jumped out to them. And actually the 2 series editors were both the editors-in-chief of their college newspapers. So kind of that collaborative atmosphere, like you take the time to go write your article by yourself, but then you come together and edit it and work on it. Just formatting a page and really having a very healthy respect for deadlines really jumped out. Otherwise, I was hired to be an editorial assistant. So I was essentially just kind of filling in the gap wherever somebody needed a little bit of extra help. Taking minutes at meetings, stuff like that. And I just kind of worked my way up from there, just learning the ropes, being available basically.
And it's your dream job.
Yeah, like when I was in high school, there was an HBO documentary about David McCullough writing his book on John Adams. And he went to the Massachusetts Historical Society and took a tour, and like they were showing all the documents. And I said to my mom, I'm like, that's where I want to work. That's my people, that's my place. And it worked out.
Amazing.
Yeah.
You have another question here from Professor Warder. I love the digital interface and how the papers are presented online. I have 2 questions. One, what percentage of the Adams papers is available online? And then 2, is the digital interface custom made or is it widely available interface?
As for the percentage, that's a really good question. We have a deal with Harvard University Press that we have to wait 2 years before we put a volume online. So we have 55 volumes available digitally. So that's covering from 1753 till 1807, I think. So it's a pretty good chunk. And then the digital collection of John and Abigail's letters is available, as well as John Quincy Adams' diary. all 68 years of that. As for the digital interface, that would be a really good question for the MHS's web developer. I think he designed, I think that was a Bill Beck brainchild. But I'm sorry, I really can't speak to it more than that.
Yeah, maybe you could be, maybe Professor Warder could be in touch with that person by email.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, I've got one here from Celeste. Let me just see, I'm having a hard time seeing who this is. Oh, here we go. Celeste Snitko. Is there a presidential library where John Adams' papers are also located, or just at the Massachusetts Historical Society?
His papers are at the Massachusetts Historical Society. There are his personal library, like his books with his notes written in them, are at Boston Public Library.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a presidential library as such, but there is his home Peacefield in Quincy, Massachusetts is kept as it was when the Adamses lived there, including the Stone Library. But yeah, I guess we're kind of the presidential library for him because, yeah, we do have all of his correspondence.
That's very cool. Is that another one here? Are the Adams papers still on deposit by the family? Does that ever pose challenges in terms of providing access to the material? In other words, I guess they're asking, are they fully owned by Mass Historical Society?
It's my understanding that they are on deposit, but the family is very engaged with us in the work we do. We have several Adams family members who are on our advisory committee, and so we meet with them 4 times a year. It's really cool to be able to meet with them and be like, guess what your great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was getting up to today. They're incredibly supportive. They're the nicest people in the world. So I don't think there's any insecurity about the documents remaining there. The Adamses have a long history with the Massachusetts Historical Society. I mean, John Adams was one of the founding members of the MHS, and a couple of his grandsons, great-grandsons, great-great-grandsons have served as presidents of the MHS. So we have a really fantastic relationship with the family. So I think we're going to be okay.
Yeah, it must be exciting for them, I would imagine, to see all this work happening. Because yeah, you know, I have a question here. Ask Gwen about the most amazing thing she's worked on, and how often do MHS get new stuff, and what's the latest thing donated? Maybe the latest exciting thing, but yeah.
Okay, so I'll have to start out by being a tease. Something was donated, but we're not allowed to talk about it yet.
Can't share it. Okay.
Can't share yet, so you're gonna have. I did ask today, still can't. But so keep your eye on the MHS. Something coming. The most amazing thing I've worked on. There's so much. I have always really loved the condolence letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to John Adams when Abigail passed. That I've just always thought that was like the most beautiful letter ever written. And I was just working, like just doing transcription one day, and I opened the next folder and it was right there. And like that kind of took my breath away because it's something that I grew up loving. I just think it's word perfect. Probably the most amazing thing is how often they make us laugh. Like when you think about how often humor changes, and like you watch something from the 40s and it's like, it's not like it's hokey. I can see where it was kind of funny. But the Adamses are like, they literally make us cry laughing all the time. I read a letter a couple weeks ago where John Quincy Adams's house caught on fire, which isn't funny, but he was not there at the time, so his wife was telling him about it. And you can tell he's so mad, but he is trying to be nice to her. And just how much that is coming through had us absolutely rolling. We were trying to collate it, and I could barely get through it. Like we had to start it like 5 times. He's not really known as the funny one, but when you know him, he is. The first day I worked at the MHS, they took me up to see the documents, which was enough to like send me into orbit. And the first thing they showed me was the definitive Anglo-American Peace Treaty. And like they flipped to where the seals were, like Ben Franklin's signature and stuff. It was just beyond. It was like a really life-defining moment. As for, we get about 3 new documents a month. It's probably a good average. Sometimes it's just a new copy of a document we knew existed, like maybe it's in the letter book. So we have like a draft or folio copy, and then we get the recipient's copy, like with John Jay's note on it or something. So something that adds a little bit more historical context and information for us. Probably the coolest thing was the first time I looked through the auction houses for some new accessions. And I was told, like, we'll buy things once in a while, but they have to be really cool because of the budget. And I found a letter between Thomas Boylston Adams, who's John and Abigail's youngest child, and his then girlfriend, future wife, when they were teenagers. And it turns out to be the earliest extant letter between them. And so it was my first week. I went into my boss's office and like, would this be cool enough? And she like jumped out of her chair. It was like, yes, that would be cool enough. So I've never really done better than that. I kind of peaked early, but it was just really exciting because there aren't too many letters that exist between the two of them, even though they were married forever and stuff. But yeah, it was just kind of exciting to see, because it was before anyone even knew. They were kind of dating in secret. So that's probably the coolest thing I found.
I know you're saying you peaked early, but don't you have like 35 more years of John to?
Yeah.
Yeah, you still have a fair number of chances, I think, to find cool stuff. So
I think so.
I have a question here from Brian Burford from the New Hampshire State Archives. Does the MHS have volunteers or interns, and what do the volunteers
do? We do have volunteers. So the John Quincy Adams digital diary was largely transcribed by volunteers. And because we had scans of the full diary available, we had volunteers from all over the world, which was really neat. You know, we had people as close as Quincy. We had a transcriber from Israel who was helping us. So it's difficult to schedule a Zoom meeting with all the different time zones. So yeah, they did some transcription for us, which is really cool. The MHS volunteers, I guess every department has their own volunteers and what they do. I know we have like some volunteer tour guides, or we did before the pandemic, and I assume that's going to come back. Yeah, our volunteers mainly do transcription for us because, as I said, like we'll go through and collate it to make sure it's exactly as we want it before we publish it. But it's a really great way for volunteers to get to engage with the material.
do? You have internships for archival students, for instance, like someone who would be at Keene State and wanted to perhaps find an internship at MHS? Yes,
we definitely do. So the Adams interns will get to do transcription. That's the main thing. But they'll use the actual manuscripts, which is really cool. And then we often collaborate with our collections department so that students get to try all different kinds of things and figure out what exactly they like and get to talk to people who have been doing it for, 30 years. And yeah, I'm trying to think. We usually have 1 or 2 volunteers a year, and collection has a little bit more than that.
And I know that you and Rodney and I spoke about your sort of in-house capabilities. Maybe you can speak a little bit to that in terms of when things need to be repaired in some way or cleaned, or just talk to us a little bit about, because you really do have a deep bench there in terms of expertise.
Yes, that's for sure. Yes, whenever we have something that needs a little bit of TLC, we only have to go down to the basement. We have a conservation lab in the basement of the MHS. and there are lovely people down there who will be able to take care of the documents. Like, we definitely keep track of how long things are on display, or like if we are using a certain diary a lot or certain letter book a lot, we keep track of how many hours it's been out, what kind of light it's been under, stuff like that, so that we can make sure that these documents are around for future generations. Hopefully a couple more centuries at least.
It'll be heartbreaking when they're gone.
I know, I'm so glad I'll be dead by then.
All right. So I have another question for you. When we spoke earlier, you had talked about your sort of fondness for collections that are children's and children and family collections, and the Adams collection sort of satisfies that itch for you a little bit. But can you speak about that and what sort of research interest that pairs with, and how you how you interact with that?
Sure. Yes, the Adams Family Papers, I would argue more than any other of the Founding Fathers projects, really has a feel for family and for children's history. I mean, we have the papers of John Adams, just like there's the papers of Thomas Jefferson, papers of John Jay, George Washington. But we also have a full separate series, the Adams Family Correspondence, which is really Abigail's domain. And the great thing about the Adamses is that, while John Adams is trying to get the Declaration of Independence signed, his kids are at home catching butterflies, is literally what was happening. That's what John Quincy wrote about. It's like, I'm trying to be serious. He knew there was a war on, but he also found a bird's nest and he wanted to tell his dad about that. And so I really love children's history because, especially during this era, because I think certainly the view that I had before I started doing this research, and I think the view that a lot of people have, is kind of like the Victorian, like children are to be seen and not heard. Like, either you're wealthy and you're sent away to boarding school or you're working in a mine. But the Adamses loved their kids and they involved their kids in everything. They weren't trying to shield them from what was going on. I mean, during the Battle of Bunker Hill, Abigail took John Quincy out on hillside so he could see it all going down. They were very aware that they were living through really singular times, and they wanted their children to have that awareness and to know what was going on. And so John Adams also, it's interesting to see the way that he's trying to educate his children, even when he's in Philadelphia, when he's trying to get the Declaration of Independence signed. He is writing home to tell his daughter about a foundry he saw and how that worked. And he's asking her like what she knows about Quakers. And let me tell you about Quakers. And like, it's kind of, it almost reads like an episode of Mr. Rogers. Like, when he would be talking and he'd be like, anyway, here's how crayons are made. Like, that's kind of how those letters read. So like the practical education, but also, the books that John Adams is writing home, telling Abigail, make sure John Quincy reads this, make sure his Latin is this good, tell Nabby to write me a letter in French, stuff like that. So because, the Adams family great tragedy is that they were apart for so much of their lives. But it's really great for people who want to study really any facet of history because they talk about everything. Every letter is a complete feast. But what's also interesting about the Adams is that you have several generations writing through all times. So whatever era you're interested in, see how elderly people are experiencing it, middle-aged people, newlyweds, teenagers, babies. George Washington Adams is, I think, 2 the first time he scribbles on a letter. And there's John Quincy writes like George tried to say hello and put like a little arrow, like that's what that scribble is. So yeah, I would say, and just talking about what to give children when they're sick, Abigail writing to her daughters-in-law, trying to give them advice. John Quincy writing to his brother saying, thank you for buying coral that George can use to teeth. If you're interested in family and children's history, this is the collection for you.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Rodney's asking, what's the most asked about topic?
Besides genealogy?
Yeah.
Probably
Currently, maybe, I guess, sorry, maybe currently what's being asked the most, if you can say.
yeah. It's a lot about John Quincy Adams. There's not like one specific topic, but as we've published transcriptions of like his congressional years, people have been very interested in that. Like during the last election, and there were a lot of questions about John Adams and the peaceful transfer of power between parties. That came up a lot. And probably the most asked question, like throughout all of Adams Papers history, is like people want to know about like Abigail Adams and her view on women's rights, stuff like that. That's kind of all ages, but especially people who are in elementary, middle, high school are very often writing a paper about that and want to talk about Remember the Ladies.
Remember the Ladies, yeah. Interesting. We have another question from Brian Burford. To follow up on Professor Warder's question, is there a benefit for a researcher to visit this collection in person? Are there many documents that don't get imaged, and what would a researcher have access to in terms of unimaged documents?
Yes, so the entire core collection that the family deposited is available on microfilm reels. We have these reels at the MHS, but they're also in different locations all around the country and again, the world. We have a microfilm location guide on our website that people can take a look at if they're interested. There's a lot in like college libraries. So everything is microfilmed. We don't usually allow researchers just visiting to use the manuscripts because we're trying to preserve them and the duty of care that we have with them. The microfilm is definitely a big help, and also the beautiful library you can see behind me. The books are a big help, but the librarians are an even bigger help. So there is definitely a lot of benefit to coming to the MHS to do research.
Versus digital research, right?
Yeah, we're trying to make the digital research as user-friendly and as widely accessible as possible, but until we can get everything up, the MHS is a good place.
Yeah. Okay, I don't know. Are we out, guys? Anything else? Oh, maybe. Hang on. Oh, Brian again. Well, actually, there are two. How would you suggest getting involved in documentary editing?
So there is something called Camp Edit that happens every year that NHPRC, I think, hosts. And that's how everybody who joins the project has to attend Camp Edit. It's like a week-long training course that if you have absolutely no knowledge of documentary editing, will take you to being a pro by the end of the week. They cover all topics. And it's a great way to network with other people who are doing documentary editing. So
wow,
that's what I would say.
Good resource. Okay,
and then volunteer with the project.
What's that?
And volunteering with the project is a good way to start too.
Yeah. Okay. And then, okay, Brian, have you read very much about the tension between J.A. and Thomas Jefferson?
What do you want to
know? Brian, you can raise your hand if you want, Brian, and speak. Yeah, here we go. I think he did. How do I do that, guys? Sorry, I'm trying. A lot of talk. Here we go, Brian. So I think you need to unmute, Brian. Yeah, there you are.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Certainly, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson had significantly different political views. And there was a very strong argument, I would say, going on between Federalists that included John Adams and the Republicans, which were led by Thomas Jefferson. I'm told that that Adams and Jefferson actually would not speak to each other for quite a number of years. And it was only later in their lives that they began to crack the tension a little bit and begin to reconverse and rebond after all of those years. Have you read very much about that? And do you see that in the documents that you handle?
Yes. Yes, for sure. It was very, the peaceful transfer of power, but it was also, they were shocked about how dirty the election got. I'm incredibly biased, so I think Jefferson was worse than Adams in that respect. But it was just like just nasty lies that were being published were really shocking, especially since they had really considered Jefferson as family. They had lived together in Europe, and he was almost like a bonus parent to their kids. I mean, John Adams once wrote to him, like, John Quincy is as much your boy as he is mine. And like when Jefferson would leave, they would just say how the house felt empty without him. So there was definitely a really deep betrayal there. And there was a period where they didn't speak. I want to say it was about 13 years, maybe. John Adams actually left the Capitol before Jefferson's inauguration. He left in the early hours of the morning so that he wouldn't have to be there. The only interaction between them during that time is one of Jefferson's daughters died. And because John and Abigail had just lost a son, Abigail sent him a condolence letter and it basically said, like, I don't like you. You know why I don't like you, but I do feel bad for you. And then he wrote back and he's like, oh, it's so good you want to be friends again. And then she wrote back and was like, I don't want to be friends again. It was a condolence letter. And so that Abigail and Jefferson wrote, I think, 6 letters back and forth where they kind of rehashed the election and what happened. And the most interesting thing about that is it was done without John's knowledge, which John and Abigail were like completely open with each other. So that was a very strange thing. And she eventually fessed up and let him read the letters. And he annotated it and said, I had no knowledge of this, and signed his name and dated it. So it was really Benjamin Rush mentioned to John Adams, he's like, you should write to Thomas Jefferson, because they kind of got to a point where everyone who had lived the things they had lived and been in the rooms they had been in, they were all dying. And it was kind of like your social world's getting smaller and smaller. And Benjamin Rush, who was a good friend, especially to John Adams, but to them both, was like, why don't you reach out to him? So John Adams sent him a very nonchalant, it wasn't an overly emotional, it was like, hey, how are things going? And Jefferson jumped right on it. And they realized that they had both wanted to be friends for quite a while. And now that the ice was broken, there's beautiful letters that they write back and forth, including, as I said, Jefferson's condolence letter with Abigail's death. And it continued until they died on the same day, July 4th. So.
I had no idea. Wow, that's an amazing. That's an
John
amazing
Adams'
thing.
last words were Jefferson still lives.
Oh,
That Jefferson had died hours earlier.
wow. Brian, did you want to continue with your other question about the organization of originals in terms of chrono, topical? Are you still on? Okay, I don't think he's on anymore, but how,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just asking, sort of in a general sense, how the originals are organized by the Massachusetts Historical Society.
Yeah, they are in boxes chronologically, and then by, like, if there are multiple letters on a specific date, it's by the author's name. But yeah, chronologically overall.
You have, and Brian, do you have a follow-up?
No, I thought I would butt out not.
Well, I think
True.
I think the question about that relationship was very interesting for all of us. Roger and Ann Sweet are asking, how did John Adams deal with Abigail's breast cancer?
With Nabby's breast cancer. But it's by the time that happened, John was retired. So their family was kind of together for the first time. So we don't have quite as much as when they're all separated. Speaking of Benjamin Rush came to tend to her. He was an excellent friend of the family. They were completely devastated when Nabby passed, because she had kind of been like the peacemaker, the glue of their family. She's really exceptional. Somebody needs to write a book about Nabby. But yeah, I think John and Nabby were very close, and I think it was very difficult, especially, she had her 3 kids, and the rest of the family kind of, especially John Quincy Adams, kind of took her kids under their wing. Like they were like Harvard age, which is an age group in the Adamses, because you have to go to Harvard here in Adams. So they were like Harvard young lawyer kind of age. But John Quincy took one of her sons as a personal secretary, and they lived with John Quincy and his wife in Washington, D.C., and kind of the whole family rallied around her. But they had lost Charles, I think 11 years before that. So, I mean, they were a family really acquainted with grief. And that was just, really hard for the whole family.
Anything else, guys?
I do have the links if you'd like me to share those.
Yeah, that would be great if you could do that. We're going to put the links to to the MHS, to the collection. And let me just see. I think there's another question here, perhaps. I don't know. Oh, no, those are the links. Okay. So the links are up. A general link for the digital resource, and then some specific links for everyone. And do we have any more questions? Anything that you feel like we have to know? Gwen? Something that just, something that you love that you want to talk about?
I'll leave with a random fact. John Adams loved being a grandfather, and he was an old man at this point, but every night after dinner, he would drag his grandson around in a chair for like an hour, and it never got old for either one of them. So that's what I'll leave you with.
Around in a chair?
Mm-hmm. To the derangement of Abigail's carpet. That's the word. Derangement.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. This has been incredible. And Rodney, are you wanting to ask something?
Oh, no, I just wanted to thank you, Gwen, for spending your evening with us there.
Thank you.
And I guess the coffee that you drank earlier worked, right? So,
Yeah, this is so interesting, and your love of this is incredible. Makes it so fun.
So thank you so much, Gwen, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight and spending your evening. And I will be sending out a link to everyone with the video recording for this session and for the March 12th workshop on transcribing historical documents. And is it okay, Gwen, if I could share your contact information? There's a couple of people who are interested in connecting with you, unless you want them just to write to the red line.
Yeah.
It all goes to the same place.
Ask the Adams expert.
So,
yeah, definitely share my contact information. I would love to talk about the Adamses more.
Good. So I think Gwen is an example of someone who's living the dream, and thank you for sharing your dream with us. And the Adams Family Papers are just such a treasure, and thank you for all that you're doing, and sharing. And so anyway, Go
Yeah,
history.
and
Okay.
working on this incredible collection that's such a gift for the public. So thank you.
Well, everyone have a good evening. Thank you, Francis. Thank you, Gwen. And let's say good night.